Good afternoon. What I was hoping to speak about today is public service jobs and the environment that we will now get within those jobs and a woke PC mania we will experience. And I thought if I can put my experiences out there, it could maybe be of a help to a younger person today in terms of how us movement people can stay below the radar and manage to keep these jobs and and basically avoid trouble, because ultimately we've all got to earn a living. Now the the thing is, it's always said in nationalism, I mean, and especially people who are prominent, like Mark and Laura, or Dr. Dutton, or people like that, their, their, their options become limited in terms of they more or less have to work for themselves. But you know, if you're still anonymous and you're young, it's good to get some. I've said in my previous videos, it's good to get some experience under your belt in various different jobs. And I've said in the video about why the BMP failed, that I think part of Nick's problem was that he didn't have enough Normie work experience. So I think it's good in a way if people within our movement can go in and experience what the environment is like, because then they can build confidence through what they've achieved at work, and they can also take that experience later on of what they've seen and how it needs to be rectified into politics. Now, I myself, I've mainly worked within the public sector. I think when I was a student, I worked for a year as a steward at a golf club, but a deputy steward. But mainly my experience is within the public sector. So I was working for a year as a history teacher on a PGCE course. That was 2003 to 4. Then I was Royal Mail from 2004 to 13. Then I was the prison service from 2014 to 2015. And then I was in a policeman in Westminster from 2015 to 2020. And I don't know if you've seen my previous videos. I was sacked from the police because outside of work, in my own time, under a false name, I criticised police participation in gay pride parades as narcissistic attention seeking, and said the taxpayer shouldn't fund virtue signalling. And I clicked like on the right-wing patriotic group Traditional Britain. So I thought, in a way, if I go back and look at my mistakes and all the stress and the worry and the conflict that it has brought me, that if a young person just setting out, I could say where I went wrong and how I could have kept my head down at certain times and avoided a lot of the stress and the hassle, and and hopefully it'd be easier for a movement comrade who's young today, who's starting out in the world. Because we'd all love to be self-employed, but not everyone in the movement can be self-employed, and a lot of us have got to go out there, do normie jobs, and keep our mouths shut. Well, my first experience of sort of a full-time normie job, after I left Exeter University, I tried to get in the Navy as a naval officer, and I was turned down because your average white man today, he has to make way for the 5 foot woman or the person of third world immigrant descent. So I was turned down at the Admiralty interview board. So I didn't know what to do. So I went and did a master's degree in early modern history at Sussex University with a dissertation on the gunpowder plot. And then after that, I went to St Martin's College and I did a PGCE to become a history teacher. And this is where my problems with the sort of middle class normie liberals began. Now looking back, when I was a teacher, when I was about 23, 24, I was probably a little bit too naive. There were times when I look back when I think I could have just kept my mouth shut there, kept my head down and avoided some of the trouble. But obviously it's only as you go on and realise how bad things are that you see, that it's no point almost trying to convince people of logic or trying to fight your corner with facts, because these people have almost got a woke religion which will brook no contradiction. And I'll get on to that later of how this really is, as Dr. Dutton says, it's become like a modern day religion, and we to a great extent are like heretics. Now, so I started in this PGCE, postgraduate certificate in education, to be a history teacher, was in Lancaster, and we had this woman who was our teacher, this boomer middle class normie woman called Janina Welch, and she had a Polish dad who was in the resistance in World War II. So she'd go on about Churchill was our greatest prime minister and all this nonsense, and she loved saying about rich multicultural areas. And because I was young and naive, I didn't realise how vindictive these people are, and sometimes I'd say something off the cuff, and she would write it down and remember it, and then if there was a disciplinary issue later on, she would use it against you. Now I remember in the first few weeks of the college, we were having a class because we did 4 weeks in the college. Then we had to go and teach in a school under a mentor. And I remember I said once, I think lunchtime was coming up and we were doing some sort of topic, and I said, I hope we finish this early because I can go back to my room and watch Cheers. And she brought that up as later on. She overheard that and brought that at a disciplinary meeting as a lack of professionalism and enthusiasm. So really, I should have clocked on to what this woman was like straight off, and been careful what I said around her, and watch myself around her, and just been very silent, very introspective around her, and not trusted her in any way. But I was young, I was naive, I was foolish. Now, the first school I went to was Our Lady in St John, and I think it was quite a shock to me of how different it was to my own school, because my school was just a Ravenswood Comprehensive for boys. So my school wasn't some sort of posh traditionalist school, but we were still and there was no sort of caning when I was there. I mean, I was at secondary school 89 to 95 more or less, but there was no, you wouldn't get caned when I was there because that had ended about 1985. But we were still to a great extent scared of teachers, and if a teacher told you off, you'd have a little bit of worry and, oh no, I've been told off. But the teachers, the children I met, they seemed a lot less scared of teachers, a lot more lippy, a lot more sort of entitled almost. Now the first point at which I ran into trouble, I mean, my mentor, who was a lady called Mrs. Hegarty, she was left wing, but give her credit, she never tried to shaft me or backstab me or report me. And she was one of these, she was second generation Irish. And she had a thing about being Irish. And you almost thought, well, if being Irish is so important to you, why are you living in bloody Blackburn? Because I remember there was a thing about, oh, you've got to understand the background of children. So I said to Miss Hegarty, I said, well, that's just political correctness. And she goes, Ireland is real to these kids. I thought, well, what do you mean Ireland's real to them? They're living in Blackburn. So, you know, and then she says, oh, a lot of these children come from very hard, very deprived backgrounds. And I sort of said to her, well, in the siege of Leningrad in 1941, children had a handful of bread, and that was their meal for the day. I said, here, yeah, I'm sure some of them have hard lives and they live in low income homes, but they're going to get free school meals, they're going to get a full meal, a full belly, and a free education. But I didn't pursue the argument. But the first point at which I ran into disciplinary trouble, we were in this meeting with this woman called Mrs. Wheeler. And there was me, and I think there was this other girl who was a teacher student from Northern Ireland, and there was this Indian, and she started talking about GCSEs, and said, oh, 90% of the children here, they're only getting D's and E's. And I sort of said to her, I said, well, grade C really is a pass at GCSE, because I said I took my maths GCSE twice. I failed it at school, I got a D in it, so I took it again at Alpington College to try and get a C. So I said, surely, the school has got an aim to increase more children getting A to C. And rather than just agree with me and say, yeah, you're right, we would like to try and gradually increase it so that more children get A to C, she sent a written complaint back to St Martin's College saying I was uninclusive. So then I had this disciplinary meeting where this Janina Welch woman brought up the fact that I'd said in the first 4 weeks about the offhanded remark about going back to watch Cheers at lunchtime. So obviously, I mean, I was young. I was outraged by this, because I thought, well, you look at any job thing, and it says, when they say about GCSEs, they say grade A to C, and it's all very well the children getting D's and E's, and then you say, but some people can only get D's and E's, but everyone should try and aim to get a C. And so that was the first sort of problem I ran into. So then we after the first instalment at this school, and one of my memories of this school is that I was in the canteen, and there was this boy, and he was queuing up for his lunch, and he was on free school meals, and he had a selection of foods that he could choose from, meat, veg, everything. And he had a plate of greasy chips, just a whole plate of greasy chips. And I thought some of these people can't help themselves, because I thought he's got the option to have a healthy meal, to have a meal with vegetables, with meat, and he's just piled up his plate with greasy chips. But this is how it goes, and I didn't dare say anything, because I thought, well, if I say to him, here son, why don't you try some vegetables and some meat with those, rather than just piling up your plate with greasy chips, that would have been me a second report from Miss Wheeler of Gus is uninclusive. Now, what we did after this first 4 weeks at the school, we went back to college, and we had 4 weeks in the college before we went on to our second school. Now, during this 4 weeks, we had a Holocaust Memorial Day where this Holocaust survivor, Mayer, who was from Manchester, I looked him up, I think he died in about 2006, he came in and talked to us all. Now, in fairness to him, I was quite interested in what he had to say because I enjoy history, so I was quite interested, someone who was present in World War II in Europe. And he struck me as a very serene and unassuming man. Like, I mean, it's like my friend John up there, who I've shown his photo on a previous video, and he was on the Arctic convoys, and he was in the water and pulled out the water, and he was one of 13 men who survived freezing waters out of a ship of 150. And often when you meet people who've been through something terrible like that, they don't tend to be braggarts. They tend to be quite unassuming people. They know they've got nothing to prove because they've been through something that would have killed a lot of people, and they've survived it. And also they've got a serenity, a calmness. They don't worry about the petty things because they almost died in this horrible incident. So this Holocaust survivor, Mayer, he did his little talk, and I think at the end of it he said he was on the bed in Auschwitz when the war ended, and the other kid on the bunk below him died, and the kid who died had an egg in his hand, so Mayer just went down, ate this kid, the egg the other kid was holding, so he could survive. And so then they had a break after Mayer had told his story, and us students were sort of milling around, and Mayer was sort of stood over there, and I was talking to one of the other students, and I just read this memoir by Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, and I was talking to one of the other students. I said, I wonder if Mayer, he would have ever met any of the sort of notorious baddies who we know from history in Auschwitz, like Dr. Mengele or Rudolf Höss. And this guy who stood next to me, Peter, he goes, he wouldn't have met, it was a camp of thousands of people. How come he wouldn't have met them? So I was like, all right. So I went up to Mayer, so hello, nice to meet you, sir. And I just said to him, I said, I'm interested in history, obviously, and I said, I wondered if you ever met any of the notorious Nazis we hear about from Auschwitz, like Dr. Mengele or Rudolf Höss. And he said he didn't have much interaction with them, but he said, oh, I did see Dr. Mengele on a number of occasions because he was in the Sonderkommando that, you know, cleared away the bodies and all the rest of it. And he also said he also saw, again, he avoided, you wouldn't obviously go near the head of a concentration camp if you're in a concentration camp. But he said he did see Höss, and he said the thing he remembered about him was he said to me, he said he had a hardness in his face. Now, obviously, within our movement, we all know the Holocaust was one of many tragedies and genocides in history. It was by no means the biggest. Now, I'm happy to accept the 6 million figure because people who've studied it in more depth than me reckon that is an accurate figure. But if someone wants to say it was 5 million, if someone wants to say it was 7 million, fine. It should be open for debate like any other topic. Now, the problem we have with this tragedy is that it's used to justify certain agendas today. And it wasn't Mayer telling his experience who did this. He was a nice enough old guy. I felt sorry for him because when I was a boy, I was well fed playing with He-Man characters. When he was a boy, he was in a concentration camp. But it was after Mayer had spoken then there was a guy who was sort of his minder, this middle-aged Jewish guy who'd never been in Auschwitz. I think he had parents and relatives in Auschwitz. And then he started talking about anti-racism and all this. And then along with this other woman who was a teacher at the college, and then she starts saying, "Oh, when you're doing your teaching, you know, about the evils of the Nazis and that," she said, "Oh, don't make groups like the BNP seem bigger than they are by mentioning them." She said, "Don't mention them." She said, "Obviously, put down these evil racists," but she said, "Don't mention them by name, because I suppose then she's scared people will look up the BNP online and find out what they're really saying." Now, this was the point at which I thought, hang on, what's the BNP got to do with Auschwitz? There was no one at Auschwitz wearing a BNP uniform. There were, as far to the best of my knowledge, there was no BNP member ever at Auschwitz. And not only that, there was the BNP is, yeah, overwhelmingly composed of indigenous British people. So none of their ancestors would have had anything to do with Auschwitz either. So why are you using a tragedy in history to justify a multicultural agenda, a PC woke agenda today? And this was my problem. It wasn't the actual survivor bloke himself, who was a nice enough old bloke. It was the next generation down of liberal and Jewish people who were using it to justify certain agendas that they want to impose on our society today. Now another thing I forgot to mention from the school that is maybe worth a mention is obviously when you're a youngster, you see your book is marked, and it's marked in a red pen by the teacher with a tick or a cross, a little mark out of 10 or whatever. You know, and so I remember I said I got out Miss Hegarty. She gave me some books to mark. So I got out a little red pen out of my pocket, and quite pleased, because you think, oh, I've now arrived where I'm at the point where I'm the teacher and I'm doing the marking. And suddenly she said, "Stop!" I said, "What? What?" I thought, "What am I doing? I'm holding a pile of books with a pen in my hand. You asked me to mark these books." And then she goes, "No, no, Gus, we don't mark books in red pen, because it's traumatic for the children if they see red writing all over their work." And I was like, now I was like, "Well, how do I mark the book then, Mrs. Hegarty?" And then she's like, "Oh no, you've got to use a green pen." Now, assuming these children were from these terribly deprived, stressful backgrounds that she was telling me about, and you know, surely the least of their worries is what colour the pen marking their book is in. And one would also think that out there in the world, you're going to get a lot worse in terms of insults and conflict and worries and troubles. And if a red pen on some book rather than a green pen on some work that you've written traumatises you, I'd say maybe you need to toughen up a little bit, because if you're traumatised by a red pen, you know, you need to, you know, maybe prepare, because there's a lot worse coming out there than a red pen on your work. So that's just another little thing. So that I remember in terms of woke craziness in schools. And there was another thing I remember. when I was at school, I think maybe there was too many fights in the playground, I think. So what they did, they got two teachers to walk round the playground uh, once every half hour during the break. And they didn't like doing it because back in the 1990s, teachers wouldn't be so touchy-feely. I think they'd rather just sat in the staff room, watch telly, and read the paper and let a few fights break out. So two teachers were sort of pushed out on a rota to walk round the playground. What they used to do, I used to walk round the playground. They used to hold their mugs as they went along, making it obvious that they'd rather be sat in the staff room drinking out their mugs. And I was in this other school, Central Lancaster High School, and I remember I had a lesson I was preparing for, and I'd just left something in the classroom in terms of preparing this lesson. And without thinking, I was in the classroom working on it, and without thinking, I went back down the corridor, which was maybe 10 feet away to the classroom, and I had this mug in my hand. And suddenly, the headmaster appears in front of me, like that, staring daggers at me. And then he goes, "Excuse me, young man, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just going to pick up some papers from my class that I need for a lesson I'm preparing." He goes, "You've got a cup in your hand." I said, "Well, I'm aware of that, sir." And then he says, "What if a child runs into you? Then you will spill boiling water, boiling hot tea all over that child." Well, first of all, the water wasn't boiling, but I thought, well, if a child runs at full pelt into a teacher who's holding a cup or a mug, that's sort of the child's own fault if they get hot tea, you know, on them. So again, it's personal responsibility, and this is a thing how this health and safety PC bullshit. You got 1993, Mr. Rayner Smith can walk round the entire playground of Ravenswood School with a mug in his hand for miles on end. 2003, I go 10 feet down a corridor with a mug in my hand, with a cup that wasn't even full. It was half full, and the water wasn't boiling. It was maybe warm, and I get this crazy headmaster telling me that I was breaking health and safety and I could injure a child. Well, I mean, obviously I didn't say anything because he was the headmaster, but like you say, it's just a measure of how from 1993 to 2003 this health and safety PC stuff has gone up and up and up. So then after Central Lancaster High School, I used to run a chess club there, and I'll tell you the funny thing, there was a boy who was in the very bottom set, and he was brilliant at chess, and no one could beat him. And I thought it's very strange that someone in the very, very bottom set, because you'd think chess would be related in terms of how good at it you are to how intelligent you are. And this boy was a chess prodigy, but useless at everything else. So I don't know whether that's slight autism or whatever, but there you go. So then I in terms of being assessed as a teacher, you have, I think it's 2 final classes you're graded on, and it's pot luck which classes they come in. And they came in one good class, which I passed, and then they came in another class, which was one of my worst classes, which was horrible little brats who misbehaved. So I just missed the standard. So then, because I'd just missed it, the college, they offered me, I'll come back in September and do, you know, 6 further weeks. No, I think it was 10 weeks, and then you can pass out and receive the certificate as a qualified teacher. So I went back, and unfortunately, this Janina Welch woman, she chose for me St Christopher's High School in Accrington, and put me with this horrible neurotic woman called Margaret Bamford. The sort of typical middle class liberal who a working class right wing person like myself is not going to get on with. And I was about 3 or 4 weeks in, and this neurotic cow, she retired about a year or 2 years later. So just my luck to meet someone like that in the very last years of the profession. And I had a row with her, and she screamed at me. This was I still remember the day. It was 26th of September 2003, and I remember that as the day I was thrown out of the teaching profession. And I had this row with her, and she screamed at me, "You're a very, very strange man." Well, maybe I am, but there you go. I didn't deserve to be thrown out of teaching because one neurotic cow has just lost her temper. And the college, I said, well, you should send me to another school, because I said, why should I lose a year of my life studying to be a teacher because this one woman has lost her temper? Because after we'd had this row, she then insisted I leave the school because she said I will cause a stress if I stayed there. So that unfortunately the college and the union took her side, and that was me done, because she'd been in teaching since 1977, the year before I was born. That was me done with teaching. And I did look up the website of the school a few months ago to see whatever had become of this woman, and it said she's now in a nursing home with a brain encephalopathy or whatever it is, where you have some sort of brain problem and bleeding on the brain. So in a sense, it's like Sun Tzu says in The Art of War. You sit by the river long enough, you see the bodies of your enemies pass by. So there's not really much point in me hating this woman, because she's now just some dribbling wreck with a brain injury in an old people's home, if she's still alive. So then, after this trauma with Margaret Bamford at St Christopher's High School, Accrington, that was my sojourn into teaching over. So I went on to another job, which was public service, which was I became a postman at Royal Mail. Now this was a good job years ago, but because I'd done this bloody university, which was I still see it as a waste of time, because I think there's nothing I learnt at Exeter University that I couldn't have taught myself, either reading books, and particularly now you can watch podcasts by all these clever, educated people, and you can learn so much. And not only that, if I watch Dr. Dutton or David Starkey online now, if they say something and I don't get it the first time, I can rewind and watch it again. Whereas when I was at Exeter University, if I was in a lecture hall, I couldn't do that. So in terms of education, I think I would say, unless you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, there's no point going to university. I mean, I never enjoyed Exeter University. I wasn't happy there. It's the only time in my life I've been lonely and depressed. And also what it did, when I was at Royal Mail, I didn't enjoy what was a good job, because I thought, oh, I should have a better job because I've been to university. So it made me feel like a failure when I shouldn't have been, because when I was doing my A-levels at Orpington College, I had a great little part-time job at the library, which I really loved, 2 evenings a week. And I always think if I'd have kept that little job at the library and joined Royal Mail straight after my A-levels at Orpington College in 1997, not only would I have got more of the good years at Royal Mail, I'd have had a good little top up from the library from another job I really enjoyed and liked, and I wouldn't have worried or been concerned about, oh, I should have a better job than this, and feel frustrated. So in a sense, looking back on those years, it was a great job. I loved the countryside. I was out in the countryside. I enjoyed talking to friendly people. There were lots of friendly, nice people on the rounds I could talk to. It's far better than being stuck in an office looking at a computer. And years ago, Royal Mail, it was good terms and conditions. And it's one of these jobs that sadly, Postman, they've chipped away at it. And it was a secure, good job for life. And you knew you'd always have enough to bring up a family on it. But what they've done, they've chipped it away and cut it to the bone, and all the good things that Royal Mail has, like job and finish. You used to have your round, and once you'd done your round, you could go. And if you wanted to rush and make an hour, so you had an extra hour to go to the gym or whatever, you could. Or if you wanted to take it slow and finish on time, you could. And that was the good thing about it. And it just became now, it's you finish around early, they try and send you out on more work. And the fact is now everyone just goes slow, so then work piles up. And years ago you could finish your round and you could do half another round, on overtime, and you could get like 2 or 3 hours overtime for an hour's extra work. So you could make good money. I mean, you used to be able to get about 350, 330 a lot of weeks, because they pay you every week. And if you're living at home with your parents, back in 2004, 2005, that was good money. Now, in terms of the woke nonsense, because Royal Mail is a less important job in terms of there's not so much power and status. The elites didn't worry about imposing so much of this nonsense. I mean, you still saw bits of it. I mean, they had a health and safety guy. I mean, he once told me, he overheard me telling a joke to another postman. There was a swear word in it, and he told me off. And he used to walk about with a clipboard, and he used to feel important because he had it. And I mean, a lot of this health and safety is common sense. A manager can implement it. Don't leave such and such in the walkway there. You don't need a specific manager for health and safety. And I think in the end they got rid of him, made him redundant, and replaced him with a part-time woman who'd had another job in health and safety. So, and I think there was a case, not at my office, Biggin Hill. There was a case in Maidstone of a woman who said she'd been harassed or bullied by another postman, and rather management didn't deal with it quick enough, so it got into a big scandal, and I think 2 people lost their jobs for bullying and harassment, and 4 managers were sacked for not dealing with it well enough or quick enough. Well, again, what they did, they made a film on this, and we all had to watch it. Now, it's obviously common sense. You can go to work and not harass or bully anyone, and if someone is being bullied or harassed, they take it to a manager, or they can take it to a higher manager if he doesn't deal with it well enough. You don't need to make a whole film on how someone's been harassed and what people should or shouldn't be able to say at work. A lot of this is common sense, but again, this is the thing that you give these PC people something, they'll run with it and spend a massive budget on it. And I think also the other incident of political correctness that I remember, there was a gay postman in the office called Lutman, and he refused to deliver the BNP leaflets because he was a fanatical left-winger. Now, in terms of these leaflets, it was around the Euro elections, and every party, we had to deliver a leaflet from every party. So I went to the manager. I said, well, I don't want to deliver the Labour Party leaflets then. And he said, well, you've got to. I said, well, he says he doesn't want to deliver the BNP ones. And I think in the end, they sort of said, oh, no, we'll get someone else to do it. So they sort of fudged it that way. But again, this is the sort of wokeness creeping in, that he can say, oh, I'm not delivering those leaflets because I'm gay and I disagree with them, and no one dares say anything to him. Whereas when I say, look, I don't want to deliver the Labour Party leaflets, well, it's your job. So it's, again, you see it gradually creeping in. But as I said, generally, because Royal Mail, you're 3 hours in the office throwing in your round and you're out on your own. So there's a less of an extent that they can have all this nonsense there. So then, after Royal Mail, which I got fed up with because they, got rid of the early starts, got rid of the job and finish. I then left for the prison service, and this was around 2014, and they had a role play to get in. I mean, the form was brilliant, the application form. Obviously, what had happened, they'd obviously had some sort of diversity meeting, and someone had realised, yeah, all this diversity, yeah, it's all well, we're getting in a lot of ethnic people and women, but maybe we're discriminating against working class white lads. Maybe they're a minority. So I thought, how do we deal with that? Because a lot of this diversity nonsense, middle class liberals are the ones who are good at it and thrive in it. So what they did, they put a little question on the form. I think this was to tell whether you're working class or not. It said, did your parents go to university? And the thing is, this wouldn't have bothered me, this question, but it never asked me if I went to university. So I've not got the least bit of interest in I spent 3 bloody years getting a bloody degree, and they're not the least bit interested in that. They don't even ask me whether I've got a degree or not. They want to know if my parents went to university, to see if I'm middle class, to see if they're employing enough middle class, enough working class or underclass people, which, again, it's ridiculous. I mean, even though I'm working class, I'd remove that question from the form, because I think whether my dad's a doctor or a dustman bears no bearing. It's not my dad applying for the job, it's me. So then you have this role play. After you've filled in the form and done the written test, you have this role play. And again, the whole system is designed against anyone right wing, any working class white male man. The whole system is designed against them, because this role play, you had one of the biggest thing, I think you were marked A, B, C and D and E, and you had to get, I think it was a B or a C in empathy. So obviously middle class liberals, they're great at this false empathy and demonstrating that, whereas people right wing, they tend to have less levels of empathy, although often in truth we actually tend to be nicer and kinder on a personal level. And so I failed it. I think I had to take it 3 times. And finally, when I got this B in empathy, I remember you had to go in to this room, and you had one diversity role play where you had to enforce diversity and tell someone to be more politically correct. You had one angry person who you had to calm down, and I remember it was out of work actors who play these people, and I remember mine was this Scouser bloke in the first role play, which I failed. I said to him, "Look, calm down. Don't fucking tell me to calm down." I said, "Oh God, yeah." So the next time I didn't go back and say calm down, and it was all sort of role plays where you had to demonstrate empathy and all this. And as I say, it's the whole system is conspiring to just pack it with liberals. And these POELT centres that would do the role plays, they were meant to have a 50% pass rate. Now I know that, and this is not my experience, not me making this up as an evil, bigoted right winger. I know there's Neil Samworth, who wrote a book on the prison service. He was a prison officer at Strangeways, and occasionally they'd ask prison officers, they'd give them a day out of the prison marking the role plays. And he said they had a role play centre they went to, and they marked 100 role plays, and they only passed 20 or 30 of them, and the prison service wanted 50 people to pass out of each 100. So then the manager, he turned round, and I know this happened, Neil Samworth wrote it in his book, and he said, go back in there with your forms and pass all the female candidates and all the ethnic minority candidates. And that says it all. And you think, is that what my granddad fought for in the war? For me to be a working class white male, to be a second class citizen? So this is the process you had to go through, and obviously I must have become an actor as good as Laurence Olivier, that I was finally able to pass it and get through it. Now the thing is, we went for prison service training, and we went to the Holiday Inn at Wandsworth. The prison service, they were quite generous. They put us up in the Holiday Inn at Wandsworth for 6 weeks. And the police training, it was all you attended on the day. I think the only time I stayed the night in a police institution was when I went down to Gravesend to do the public order training, because they cut it to the bone in terms of the residential aspect of it. Whereas the prison service, they put us up for 6 weeks in the Holiday Inn at Wandsworth, and we used to train in a PO-out centre next to Wandsworth. And you go in the prison itself for the training in the control and restraint techniques, where you'd practice these techniques that prison officers do, where when 2 prisoners are fighting, they separate them, and they have 1 officer there and 1 officer there and 1 on the head, and it's a matter of, it's sort of judo type restraint techniques and then they would take them in these arm locks down to a segregation. You know, that is the restraint techniques you're taught, and again this has a bearing on the George Floyd case, because that technique that Derek Chauvin had of restraining the neck, he wouldn't have just come out with it because he didn't like black people. It would have been a restraint technique that the police college taught him to use. So that's something I never saw in the paper. Now the first thing that struck me, I went into this classroom, this prison service classroom, and I think I was chatting to 1 or 2 of the guys outside before we went in. I thought, oh, well, I'll sit next to him, he's a nice guy. But you go into the classroom, and the amazing thing is, all the chairs have got names on. You cannot sit where you want to sit in the classroom. And I guarantee you one thing, you will not have a white male sat next to you. You'll have a woman there and a non-white there. And I think it was this Muslim guy there. He was okay enough guy, and I had this other girl called Ellie, who was on the other side of me, and I thought, why have they done this? And then you suddenly realise, and when a group of people go in, are put together, and they go into a classroom, you'll have the guys who are a bit more intellectual, like reading, or form off into one group. You'll have the guys who are maybe a bit sporty, a bit hard man, like rugby, go off into another group. The women will all go together. But what they've noticed is that the people will segregate along sex and race lines. So I thought, this is the extent to which they have to impose the wokeness. They've realised you can't even let people sit in the classroom where they want to sit, because they might choose to sit next to another white male, and the women might sit with another woman, and the Muslims might sit with another Muslim. And this is the extent of this. And like I said, I had this blonde Ellie girl on one side, and she was always going on about her psychology degree. And if I ever said anything, I mean, I'd try and obviously I wouldn't say anything too hardcore, but if I ever said anything vaguely right wing, it would always be straight away, you can't say that. And this Ellie girl, she, I remember once in the class, she sat there and she started slagging off her own granddad because apparently he used non-PC terms. And you think, you know, it's almost like Mao's China, where people, where you get people who are called on to testify against their own parents and their own grandparents. And the bearded jihadi on the other side of me, see, I'm there. He I remember once they let him go home early to pray, and I thought, and this was the point at which I did slip up. I did say something. I said, well, why has he gone home early? Why is he allowed to go home early? And then I had this guy who was Waller, who was this massive 6'5" bloke. He's one of these idiots, Normie idiots. It made him feel clever to be PC. And he goes, oh, he's a very religious Muslim. It's Ramadan. He needs to go home early. And I said, well, I'm a Catholic. I want to go home and pray. Why can't I go home then? And then I said, why is his religion more important than my religion? And obviously, I got in a little bit of trouble for that. They had a little word with me. I got a little warning not to say stuff about religion or race. And the other thing that I noticed was that there is a point in the course at which they will take you aside in prison service training, and they will have a sniffer dog. You'll all stand, they'll take you out of class 3 at a time, and you'll all stand like that, and a sniffer dog will come up and sniff you. And apparently this sniffer dog, he can tell if there's any sort of cannabis granules in your clothing. And I think there was one black guy who lost his job because he had cannabis granules on his clothing, and then they checked his car and there was some in his car, so he'd obviously smoked a joint at some point. I mean, in the police, what they do when you join the police, they take a piece of your hair because then they can tell if you smoked cannabis in the past 8 weeks. But in the prison service, they do this little test with the sniffer dog. And I think there was another lad who had little cannabis granules in his bag, but he lived in a shared house, and so he said someone else in the house had smoked a joint while he was there, and he got away with that because there was none on his clothing, so they believed him that he hadn't smoked the joint. But the interesting thing is, I was taken out with 3 other people to stand there like this and wait for this sniffer dog to come and sniff us and see if we'd had any cannabis or drugs of any sort, and any granules of them would be on our clothing. And just before they got this sniffer dog, you had the big boss who was running the course, who wouldn't even be there all the time. He took Mr. Masood, the Muslim, aside about 10 or 15 foot away and had a little private word with him. Now obviously I can't know for certain what was said, but no one else was taken aside by the big boss before the sniffer dog came down the line and given a little private chat with the head of the entire. And what obviously happened there, the head of the entire course, he knows Muslims don't like dogs, so he probably said to Mr. Masood, is it a problem for your religion to have this dog sniff you for drugs? And if he'd have said yes, I mean, would it then have become optional for him? Whereas everyone else has to take it, has to have this sniffer dog come by. And credit to Mr. Masood, he said, no, I'm happy to do it with, because he came back to the line and was sniffed. So I'd assume that was the conversation that was had. But that's just another example of the woke insanity of different standards for different people. And apparently the religion of Islam seems to get more credit in terms of the prison service and more consideration than a lot of other religions. And at the end of the course, I remember we were all having a chat in the classroom, and there was this Danielle girl, and I think she immigrated to New Zealand after, and she's a pleasant enough girl, but another PC drone. She insisted on telling everyone in her introductory chat that she was a married lesbian in the first 5 minutes, and then she said at the end she wasn't one of these really butch obvious lesbians. So I wonder if she was a little bit both ways, and had decided to be a lesbian because it was PC. But you know, because you get, as Dr. Dutton says, the sexuality of females is less fixed than that of males. So you can get some females who could go either way. And she then says at the end of the course, when the class has just passed and we're all bonding, she then says, oh, I was a bit nervous of getting up saying I was a lesbian because I was thinking, what would Mr. Masood, you know, the bearded Muslim warrior, what would he think of me? And he's trying to bond with her, and then he says, he said, my religion, we believe in tolerance. And he goes, Danielle has a right to her view. And you suddenly see all the instructors, they're looking worried. Oh, God, God, God. It's not a view. It's not a view, being a lesbian. You know, so that is HMP Wandsworth prison service training. So after that, we went up to the people who, because I was going to HMP Feltham, which was for under 18. So people who were going to HMP Feltham, they went up to the main prison service college, which is up near Rugby. You have to do a week of a further course about how you deal and interact with young people. And this was run by this pair. There was Sarah, this middle-aged woman, and then there was this guy called Lee. And they were, I mean, give them credit, they were pleasant enough. But again, more PC drones. And I remember this middle-aged woman, Sarah, she started saying once about, oh, I live in a little village in Norfolk. And then you sort of got the feeling from the class, they're like, oh, she could see the class were thinking, oh, UKIP type country. And then she said, because she said, I hang around this little village, I go to this little pub, and you could see the ethnic people in the class were thinking, oh, a little village in Norfolk, little pub in Norfolk, UKIP type country, UKIP type people. And then this woman Sarah, she's so desperate to be right on in PC. She says, "Oh, I only hang around with open-minded people." And then she I remember her saying, she said, "I don't hang around with those sort of people." And I was like, what? Do you go into a pub with a pen and paper and say, "Is anyone here UKIP? Because I can't speak to you. Is anyone here vote BNP? Because I can't speak to you. I can only speak to the Liberal people." I mean, obviously women are going to be more social conformists, but even for a woman, you thought, you know, that is a little bit off the wall. And along with this Sarah lady teaching this week course about looking after young people, there was this guy called Lee. And he was this middle-aged bloke. I remember he had a little like goatee beard, and I remember he had this little phrase that he used to say. He'd say, "Nobody is born racist. Nobody is born homophobic." And after he said it, he'd sort of look down. He'd sort of do a smug, self-satisfied midwit smile. And well, sorry, Lee, they've had tests on babies that have shown racial preference. But what you've got to do with these people, I mean, in the prison service, there's a big divide between the prison officers who wear the uniform and the management, the governors who wear suits. And I remember one of our other tutors, he was always going on, I want to be in a suit by the time I'm 35. Now, what you've got to remember, Lee is probably someone who joined the prison service in the early 1990s. He spent years in some grotty prison, searching drug-addicted, smelly homeless people, splitting up fights of hard men where he, could have quite easily or maybe even did get hurt. And then by paying homage to this religion of wokeness, of PC, he's been able to get this cushy little management job teaching this week alongside Sarah in Rugby Prison Service College of about how you be a prison guard or prison officer in terms of the allowances you have to make for under 18s. So you've got to give these people a little bit of leeway. It's all very well us saying, oh, they're brainwashed midwits. Well, in a sense, yes, they are. But you've got to see from Lee's point of view, poor old Lee with his one GCSE joining the prison service, and by paying homage to this woke religion, he's got a cushy little management number, and he can say this little phrase again: nobody's born homophobic, nobody's born racist. Just say it and then sit there and look self-satisfied. Oh, I'm so clever. Look at me making this woke statement. And this is where it comes from. I mean, it's hard to tell in a way who are the true believers and who are the people who are just going along with it because it's given them a good number, a cushy number. So after a year in Feltham, I left the prison service. I'd first went to Feltham. I went on this swallow wing, and I had more bad luck. I was put with this. There was this horrible little git called Dundee on the wing. It was like I used to call him 2-bit bully. He got sacked after I left for beating up a prisoner, and his little sidekick was this girl called Jenny Butler, and I used to call her Jenny Grass Butler because anyone she didn't like, she was always making up lies and grassing them. And this was new to me because in Royal Mail you'd argue with people, but you'd never want to be thought of as a grass. But this Jenny Butler girl, it didn't seem to bother her. And I remember, because she didn't like me, I remember one time I went to get some prisoners from the library. And when you've got a group of prisoners, they're firing questions off at you at times, and you try and reply to them, keep them sweet. And I remember some moves in a prison you would call over the radio, and some you wouldn't, because obviously when prisoners are being moved, they don't want two groups meeting where they've got two prisoners from rival gangs who happen to meet in the corridor and have a massive fight. And because there was quite a lot of them, I thought, oh, I'll call this move over the radio, because prison officers often have radios. So I called the move. I said, can I take these 20 prisoners back from the library? And this young lad was there, and he said, oh, Gov, they don't normally call back the move from the library. And I said, no, I think they normally do call the library move. I mean, I just said it just to keep him sweet, rather than just ignoring him, give him a reply. Yeah, I think they do normally call this one. And Jenny Butler, who was sitting there, she later did a report to management that Gus asked a prisoner whether he could use his radio. I mean, I ask you, and she was your typical aggressive feminist woman who'd go mad when her boyfriend, who also worked there, met his ex, because she knew his ex would be a nicer person inside and out than she was. I remember Dundee once, I left my watch at home, and I asked him the time about 2 or 3 times, so he wrote a report. I had little sense of time. So my overall boss, Mr. Cook, who was a great guy, who was ex-military man, I asked if I could go to another wing, because these two were always slagging me off and they turned other officers against me. So I went to another wing. I went to the Kingfisher wing, and a lovely group of people. Really, really liked being there. Enjoyed it, and it was a pleasure to work there. Good group of prisoners on that wing. A good group of staff on that wing, and my mentor Katie was on that wing. And like you say, it was almost hard to leave in a way for the police, because I'd sort of settled there. But I was paying rent on a room in Feltham, because I live a long way from Feltham in Biggin Hill. So it made economic sense to leave for the police, because also the police was higher wages, only about 100 or 200 higher. But with the fact that I was paying 400 a month for this room, it also added more on my money. So I then went and joined the police. And once again, you run into the wokeness. And first of all, I went to Marlow House in Sidcup. And our teacher was this guy called Staff Denton. And it was another case of, like Janina in teaching, another sort of normie boomer. And I remember it once he told us, he was talking about homosexuals, and he told us, oh, I went to see a film with my wife in the 1990s, and this gay bloke was looking at me in the cinema, and I moved to somewhere else. And he's like, he was almost telling it like a story he was so ashamed of, that he was so prejudiced back in the day. And I thought, well, if I went in a cinema and I was sat there and someone was staring at me and it made me feel a bit uncomfortable, I thought it wouldn't matter who they were, whether gay, straight, whatever, I'd bloody move. And I'll say, excuse me, mate, please, what's up? What's your problem? Uh, but then he was saying, then he went on to say about, oh, now I've got a gay nephew, and it's part of my life. I mean, well, I've got an uncle he's been dead years, who was a gay, but doesn't mean it's part of my life. It doesn't mean that I have to advocate for the LGBT agenda, because my dad's late brother, my dad sadly as well as his brother, are both been dead over 10 years, were gay. I mean, it's ridiculous. But again, this was a case of a boomer who'd grown up in more sensible times, and he feels by saying this sort of nonsense, it makes him clever. And I remember they were talking about rape, and I said, oh, well, if a woman's been raped and you're dealing with a woman who's just been raped as a police officer, I said, surely one of the things you would do, you would say to her, do you wish to speak to a female officer? Out of consideration. Oh, no. And he reacted against that. That's so old-fashioned to make that statement. He said, a woman who's been raped, I mean, it's common sense. I mean, some poor woman who's been raped. What, Staff Denton, you've got a 6-foot bloke with tattoos built like a brick shithouse, or a little 5-foot, motherly looking woman. Which one are you going to send to talk to her? I mean, it's common sense, it's nature. But again, these people feel that if they go against nature, if they worship at the temple or the woke religion, it makes them clever. And this is what you run into time and time again. Now, during police training, I had to move from Marlow House in Sidcup to Hendon because, again, I ran into a disciplinary issue. Now, obviously, when I was in teaching years ago, I was a bit too loudmouthed, a bit, not circumspect enough. And by the time I'd got to the prison service and the police, I was a lot wiser. I slipped up occasionally, but I was a lot wiser at keeping my head below the radar and not flashing up as your evil right winger. But again, we come into the classroom on the first day, and it's the prison service all over again. Names on the chairs. You're not allowed to sit where you want, with who you want. And I can guarantee you, the person sat next to you, it will not be a white male. I mean, I would be interested to hear if the military's like this. I know there's that guy in the movement. I think he's called Natty. I know he lives down Cornwall and he does rowing. I'd be interested to hear if they try this in the military. This sort of micromanagement of wokeness in terms of you can't even sit in a classroom next to the person you get on with. So I was sat next to this girl, this Egyptian girl called Sahar Musa. And obviously you try to make the best of things, don't you? You try to get on, you try to be nice. And I try and make conversation. I remember she told me she lived in Thornton Heath. So I said, oh, right. I said, my dad used to work there when he was working for the council. So I talked to her a little bit about that. Then she showed me a picture of her boyfriend who was some sort of pale Moroccan bloke. So I said, oh, what's he do then? And these things are relevant because they'll come back, believe me. Again, just making conversation, just trying to be pleasant. But obviously, when they go to the pub after class on a Friday, I'd always avoid that. I'd always say, look, I've got to get home. My mum's, because truthfully, my mum wasn't well then. I mean, she didn't need me to get home because my Uncle Alan was looking after her. But I didn't want to socialise because I thought if you slip up and say something non-PC, it won't be necessarily at work. It'll be after a glass of wine in the pub. So then one day we had to do searches. So what they did, there was this teacher. He put all the names in a hat, and I picked the name out, and it had Sahar Musa, who was sat next to me, and I thought, oh well, here we go. So we went into this room to practice this searching. And what we had this older woman who was joining after years as a special, who had children, and she was sat at a desk. And this is how you practice in the police. You practice with role plays. So when you search someone, I'd demonstrate this with a teddy bear, little teddy bear assistant. When you search someone, you obviously you can't put your hand straight in their pocket because the sort of people you're searching, they're going to be homeless, drug addicts, people like that, who could well have a hypodermic needle in their pocket, and if that touches you, you could get HIV or God knows what, or hepatitis B or whatever. Even though when you do a search, you will put plastic blue gloves on. So before you put your hand on a pocket, you will pat the pocket. So I patted the pocket on the side of her fleece and searched it. And then she says to me, oh, you don't need to put your hand that far in my pocket. So at this point, I should have realised this neurotic girl is not comfortable and just binned it. But I continued because I thought, well, we've got the other woman sat there, so she's a witness, so she can see there's nothing untoward going on. So I then she had a pocket on the back of her cargo trousers. So I then patted that, because obviously, as I said, you don't just put your hand in a pocket in a search, and we're trying to do it like it's done in real life. So I patted that, and I'm about to put my hand in after I've checked there's nothing in, and then she suddenly moves away and says, I'm not happy with that, and moves towards the door. And then the other woman who's in there, she sort of looks confused. She sort of sat at the table marking this role play, and she sort of looks confused. And then she sort of goes to leave the room. And I said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, if you're not happy, I said, why didn't you ask to be searched by another female? I said, why have you done this role play with me if you're not happy being searched by a male? So then she walks out off down the corridor, in a huff, and then this other woman who's marking the role play, looking confused, goes after her. And then I'm sat there in this room and I'm thinking, oh God, I think I've obviously had an incident where I've upset a Muslim. They're going to now find out that I'm a white nationalist, that I don't really like these people, because if you get someone who's Muslim or black who's all right, you like them, you forget their nation, their religion. But when you get one who's annoying, who's irritating, who's entitled, who's got a chip on their shoulder, it's always there in the back of your mind, why are these people in my country? And then so I'm thinking, oh God, they're going to find out I'm a right winger, I've upset a Muslim. So then Staff Denton, he suddenly appears and he comes in. Don't talk about it, Gus. I was like, what? He said, oh, and then the sergeant who's running the course, it was a nice enough bloke, again, another fanatic left winger. But he came and spoke to me and said, oh, you've had a complaint of a sexual assault made against you. And I'm like, you what? And not being funny, but this girl, as well as being Muslim, she was just a fat plain girl. I had no interest in her whatsoever. So obviously after this, because this Sahar Musa had made this allegation, I couldn't be in the same building as her. So I was transferred up to Hendon for the rest of my training, and it was, in retrospect, it was actually better being at Hendon, because I think you get a better standard of training at Hendon. Is where the police have always trained, and you're not just like in an office block in Sidcup. And obviously I passed the 3 exams, and I had the CS spray sprayed in my face, and then I passed the OST course. So then, after training had finished, all the others went out onto the street. But because I'd had this allegation, I was then put on restricted duty, and I had to go to a traffic office for 3 months. So I went back to Marlow House, and I worked in this traffic office for 3 months after passing out the police college. And I quite enjoyed it. There was no night shifts. It was 8 till 4. It was nice ladies who worked there I used to go to lunch with. Even the woman running the office was very nice and did a statement in my favour. And I think it was the 11th floor of Marlow House. Then after that I went down to the 8th floor. And again they did me a lovely card when it was my birthday. And then after 3 months, I had the interview with the DPS. So I went up to Lily Road to be interviewed about this allegation by the DPS. So then they put her case against me, and then she tried to say, oh, I fancied her, and because I'd been pleasant and sort of said, "Oh, what does your boyfriend do?" She said, "I was trying to find out about her boyfriend." Because I made conversation about, "Oh, my dad worked in Thornton Heath," as you would if you sat next to someone. She then said, "Oh, he was trying to find out where I lived." Well, I've got no interest where some fat, ugly Muslim lives, to be honest. But then she contradicted herself because she said, "Oh, he had this interest in me. He's trying to find out where I live. He's interested in who my boyfriend is, but I describe him as a loner who avoids socialising with the other people in the class. And then at lunchtime, rather than going to the canteen to sit with the other people, he goes and sits in his car and reads his newspaper." So I said to the women interviewing me, I said, "Well, if I've got this obsession with this Sahar Musa girl, surely I'd have gone to the canteen with her. I'd have gone to the pub after work with her. I wouldn't have gone off and sat in my, because obviously I went off to sit in my car at lunchtime because I didn't want to be around people amongst whom I have to be politically correct. I'd rather be on my own reading the paper." And I said, "Well, if I had this obsession with her, I'd have been taking every opportunity I had to socialise with her, and I didn't." And they obviously agreed with the logic of of my what I'd said. And the very day after the interview, they realised it was nonsense. And Mr. Reynolds, who was the Federation solicitor, he said to me, he said, "They have met her." And he looked at me, so obviously he knew they'd met her, they'd sized this up. And what she also said, she said, "I'd stood massaging her bum for about 3 or 4 minutes." Well, unfortunately for her, there was the other woman in the room marking the course, and she said no, he patted the pocket, and then he looked confused. So this idea, this fevered imagination, that I'd stood there going like that for about 5 minutes. Again, luckily I had someone else in the room. But the thing to note here with all this nonsense is what kept me my job here and stopped this crazy neurotic girl making up this nonsense and losing me my job was the fact that I kept a little bit distant from the rest of them, that I'd avoided the socialising, I'd avoided going to the pub, sitting in the canteen with them at lunchtime. That is what kept me my job. And if I'd have kept that up, I probably would still be a police officer. And obviously after this, I was very, very cautious about searching females. But then, luckily, after a while, I think it was about 6 months into my service on the street, they brought in the body-worn camera. So if you search someone, you'd always switch on your body-worn camera, because I think the police were getting so many allegations from females who were searched by males. And it was any female who didn't like the police, if they were searched by a male officer, they'd say they'd been assaulted. So, but once you've got the body-worn camera on, they can see you on camera. They know you're not some sort of Jimmy Savile pervert who's out for some cheap thrill. You're just trying to do your job in difficult circumstances. And this is the thing. And I'd say to youngsters now, I'd say keep a bit of distance, and that way it will help you at times keep these public service jobs. But what happened was I was in for a few years, and then in 2017 I joined this impact team. Now as well as avoiding socialising with them, I'd avoided any contacts other than work, in terms of I wasn't Facebook friends with anyone in the police. And I'd done this, and what I did, I had a Facebook account under a false name, Gusty Chatillon, and I didn't have my photo as my profile. I had a photo of, I think, a view or a medieval knight or something like that. But when I was on this impact team, there was this really nice lady called Judith, who was a Geordie, and I got really close to her and the rest of the team. And I've said before, there was this guy Lee, and he'd been in the military in the 80s, and he loved to go to the pub and shoot the shit after the last shift. And I almost wanted to say to him, look, it's not like it was in the 80s or 90s. Someone can say something in the pub now, and these PC youngsters will report them the next day. But he persuaded me, and I went to the pub, and we had a good time. We had a laugh, and my guard was lowered, and I got friendly with them. And then this Julia woman, she found me on Facebook and sent an invite, and I weakened, and I accepted it. And then you get the algorithm will suggest other people, and this is the thing. Now the thing is, some people will stand out as politically correct. Now there was a guy called Stuart Hawke who about every 5 minutes he had to mention that he was gay and talk about his gay partner. And he used to sit in the neighbourhood office at Paddington and go on about how he hated Trump. And one time, someone said the word gay in a negative way, and he went over to that's so gay. And he went over to the other side of the office, and he really shouted and had a go at them. Well, I wasn't there at the time, but there was this nice Russian girl who left because she didn't like the shifts. I think her name was Inessa, I think. And she said, that Stuart Hawke, he makes fun of, because he was good at mimicking accents. He was like a mini Ayatollah. He makes fun of my Russian accent and does my voice. Yet when someone says the word gay, as in, oh, that's so gay, in a negative way, he's running over and screaming at them. And this is the thing, that he wants to be able to joke and make fun of other people, but anyone saying about anything, the LGBT agenda, he's on them. And I was actually there in the office, and I heard one time him say he was joking about sleeping with a 15-year-old boy, and he said, "Oh, I'd say, I swear I thought he was 16." Now I mean I was sat there and I thought, well, if I was to sit here now in a police office and joke about sleeping with a 15-year-old girl, my feet wouldn't touch the ground. And it's on me as well. I didn't say anything because I was already suspected slightly of being based. So I didn't say anything, but I thought this is the thing. These people are untouchable. And people used to talk openly about a gay mafia in Charing Cross, and they'd all know each other. And I think there was one called Anton who had a little rainbow car that he used to drive about. And once I remember me and this other officer we were in Soho, and we arrested this transsexual for fighting, real ladylike activity, fighting in Soho. And I could, because obviously when you're taking someone to custody, you have to say whether it's a man or a woman, whether they're old or young. Let custody know what's coming. So I said over the radio, I didn't know whether to say it's a man or a woman. So I said, it's a transsexual. And then there was the guy who drove the little rainbow car about, Anton, he started complaining about that. But luckily, one of the older people on Impact team had a word with him on my behalf and calmed it down and said, look, he's quite popular on this team. Look, he didn't mean anything by it, and luckily backed off. And obviously I've said on my other video about the time we were out in a van and I had this Charlie Charles bloke who was a PC fanatic go on at me because I'd used the phrase Arab boys about some lads in a car. And there was a little Pakistani guy called Mansell, and he again was one who would give people lectures if they said anything non-PC. There was a few people who I suspected were on my wavelength, but you wouldn't dare speak about it openly. And this is the thing. But I say about racism in the Met, there was a few people I suspected might be right wing. I wouldn't obviously mention their names here, but again, they wouldn't dare say it openly. And this idea that the Met Police is racist, it's not the Met Police is racist, it's the Met Police is communist. That's what they should be worrying about. But anyway, this is where we get to my sacking. Obviously, I've said at the beginning I was sacked for criticising police on gay pride parades and liking the group Traditional Britain. Now, the algorithm suggested this bloke called Paul Bluer, and he was someone I neither liked nor disliked. He was someone I was neutral about. Now, I've just said to you about people who stuck out because they would be like the enforcers of political correctness. I've said to you about the people like this Anton in his little rainbow car, like this Stuart Hawke screaming at someone for saying the word gay, like this little Mansell going about, you know, correcting people's language, like Charlie Childs going about. All these people, they stuck out for enforcing PC. So obviously, if one of them had been suggested or sent me an invite as a friend on Facebook, I'd have said no straight away. But this Paul Bluer, I've never heard him tell anyone off for not being politically correct. I'd never heard him sort of preaching political correctness. I'd never even heard him talk about politics. He was a sort of your typical grey man. And this is the lesson for any youngster watching this, is the danger in losing your job. The person who's going to grass you isn't often going to be the most obvious. The danger will come from where you least expect it. It will be the grey man, the person you don't notice, who grasses you. And then this Paul Bluer, he followed me into the private Traditional Britain group and screenshotted my remarks about police going on gay pride parade as narcissistic attention seeking and the taxpayer shouldn't fund virtue signalling, and he screenshotted my like on Traditional Britain and Britain First, and that was obviously enough to get me on restricted duty, then suspended, then sacked. Now, the thing is, I'd always assumed when you're in your house, us movement folk, we can discipline ourselves to not say anything at work. But the problem is when you're in your house, and my Uncle Alan always said you'd probably had a glass of wine, you relax. And this is the problem. You relax in your house and you speak freely. And this is where they can get you on the social media. Now, I'd always assumed that no one would be that interested in me. Because let's face it, when I went home from work, I tended to forget about work. I tended to switch off, forget about work. I mean, I might like a picture if I saw it, but I wouldn't be going into someone's profile and what did they do and what's their opinion on that. I just wasn't that interested in them. And I'm obviously not that interested either. So I was amazed that someone was so interested in me that they would sneak into my profile and screenshot me saying something that was non-PC and then send it to the DPS, the Department for Professional Standards. And it's amazing, you go from being an officer at the heart of your team, Team E, who people say is, you know, and you've never done anything wrong at work and you've treated all members of the public the same, as is your duty, whatever your private political views, and then all of a sudden you become this evil pariah and no one wants to speak to you. And all these people you thought were your friends don't want to know you. And there's a few people that stay loyal, a few decent, good people, but sadly the majority, they back away, and some people will even actively start, you know, coming in to kick you when you're down. And the thing is, this is growing, this sacking for social media, because I've got the figures. In 2017, there were 37 policemen lost their job for social media posts. In 2018, it was 38. In 2019, it was 50. In 2020, it was 102. And in 2021, it was 111. So I'd have been one of the 102 in 2020. But as you can see, it's going up each year. This social media, that what it's doing, because people feel relaxed at home. They say what they think at home. And then you get people like Paul Bluer, and they'll catch you out there. So my advice to any young person with any public sector job, whether you're a teacher, an NHS worker, a policeman, don't be friends with your colleagues on Facebook, because you think, oh, I can avoid the people who are going to grass me, but you never will know who's going to grass you. It will be the grey man who you never notice. So best thing is, you say to people at work, I've got no social media, I'm not interested in it, and you avoid it that way. And if you do have a social media for your outside life, you have a false name and you have a false profile photo. And there's now the next thing is, I've talked to you about all this woke insanity in public service, and the fact is, this is not cheap. I mean, you think the DPS? There were numerous people investigating me. There were, writing MG11s, interviewing me. They were paying me a year on restricted, another year on suspended. That's about 48 grand. All the time when I could have been out on the street doing my job as I'd always done, without upsetting anyone, being impartial. But the thing is, this costs a lot of money to enforce all this woke insanity. And I've got a good article I read the other week from Leo McKinstry in the Daily Mail, and it said about, we're always hearing about the NHS. They're short of money. They're desperate. They're struggling. I mean, my Uncle Alan is paying 350 odd a month for health insurance, and he's pleased to do it because things are in such a dire strait. And I heard on LBC the other day that about some poor old woman who lay on the floor for 4 hours after collapsing. And there's 7 million people waiting for operations. Yet still, the NHS are spending 40 million a year on 812 equality, diversity and inclusion managers. And that could pay for 1,200 nurses. Now, overall, there's about 8,000 taxpayer-funded officials, taxpayer-funded, working in equality, diversity and inclusion. Now, they work out that police, I mean, I don't know whether this covers my old friends at the DPS Diversity Directorate investigating me. They're spending, police forces nationally, about 10 million a year on this. I mean, to give one example, Derbyshire Police, they recently advertised for a head of equality, diversion and inclusion, and the salary was 49k. Now, a policeman, he's obviously paid about 24k, 25k, and he has to stand out on the street in freezing weather and roll about on the floor with drug-addicted shoplifters, whereas this head of diversity, equality and inclusion, he gets paid double the policeman's wage for sitting in an office, persecuting people, saying what people can and can't say. And it's the same in education. I mean, I've told you about the insanity I had in the teaching profession, but I think the universities are even worse. I mean, there's Cardiff University. They advertise 51 a role of 51,000 a year for a program officer, so they can become an anti-racist organisation. And Kingston University, they're even more generous. They're offering 54,000 a year for an equality, diversity and inclusion officer. You've got all these poor kids who are struggling with tons of debt to pay tuition fees, and the university say, because I mean, I was lucky, when I went to university in 1997, the very last year to get it for free, and the universities are saying, well, we can't do it now without tuition fees because things are so tight and there's so many kids going to university. Yet when it comes to diversity and inclusion officers, they're prepared to throw 50 grand plus at someone. And it's even going in terms of charities. Now, this is a little nugget I learnt off Tea Time with Sam and Laura, their great show on a Monday night, and they said the Royal British Legion recently advertised for a £55,000 a year diversity officer. So you think all these poor old ladies standing out in the rain, you know, collecting 50p's in tins, and they're thinking they're doing their bit for the Royal British Legion. All these people doing collections and, you know, charity stalls and all the rest of it. And what do they do with the money? 54,000 a year, no, 55,000 a year on a diversity officer. And charity, this really shows charity, the hypocrisy of middle class liberals, because you think your average right winger, I mean probably me, all the people who watched right wing shows online, all the people in the movement, we wouldn't want to take 50,000, 100,000 off a charity as a wage because we think it was wrong. I mean, David Mellor, I used to listen to his LBC show that he used to do on a Saturday with Ken Livingstone. He said what these charities could do, they could have chief executives who were retired from other chief executive roles who did it 4 days a week for say 30,000 a year. But instead, you've got these people, these middle class liberals who run charities. Now, I think one of the most notorious that I've heard of is Save the Children, and there was Helle Thorning-Schmidt, the ex-Prime Minister of Denmark, and she was running Save the Children, and she was getting, I've seen various estimates of her wage, but it's either $257,000 or $299,000. So, in Christmas 2017, there were 128,000 children sleeping homeless. Now, this is the thing this is what Dr. Dutton says about these liberal people. They got all the virtue signalling, all the heart on the sleeve, but they're actually probably nastier people than we are, far nastier and far more Machiavellian. That they can take a charity like Save the Children, and that woman, she's not alone. There's all of them are doing it. That Stephen Kinnock, she's married to, the Kinnock's son, who's an MP as well. She's married to him. But charity shows that this whole diversity inclusion stuff is basically a racket for middle class liberals, and you know. And these are the sort of people who are infesting the institutions. And it's not just the institutions, it's the pressure groups who influence the institutions. Now, I've got Tuesday's Daily Mail, and it said the Royal Opera House, it had to stop taking money from BP because it got pressure from these climate change groups. And one of these groups is called Culture Unsustained. And one of the people who runs it is called Claire Palliard. And her website introduces her as an anti-racist, intersectional feminist, disability activist, an LGBT ally, as well as a climate activist. Now, what this reminds me of, some evenings after I'd finished my shift, if I had a few days when I was in the police in London, I'd go out for a Chinese meal, then I'd go in the casino. And once I was in Napoleon's casino in Leicester Square, and this old Chinese woman called Miss Lin came in, and all the staff knew her name. And she must have had a lot of money, but she didn't have a load of nice fancy clothes on. Probably spent it all gambling. And she came in. She sat next to me on the roulette table, and she put a chip on every single number. And I sort of gently tried to say, look, if you put a chip on every number, there's 37 numbers. It's 35 to 1. Yeah, your number will come up, but you won't win any money. But it didn't register with her. And I think this Claire Palliard, that's the equivalent with virtue signalling. She can't just be a climate activist. She can't just be an LGBT ally. She's got to be an intersectional feminist, an anti-racist. Every woke call's going, she's got to be on it. And that's the sort of people that we've got in the institutions nowadays. They're almost addicted to it. They can't just have anti-racism. They've got to have the climate. They've got to have they've got to have the LGBT stuff. And this is the sort of people that who are going through our institutions now. Now, I mean, this is why we end up spending $2 billion a year putting up migrants rather than giving them a shave, a hot meal, and send them straight back to where they came. And the thing is, our institutions, they weren't always like this. Now, when I was a postman, I'd occasionally do a bit of window cleaning for people I got friendly with. And I had this lovely old couple in Westerham called Mr. and Miss Pendleton. And I remember he told me he'd been in the diplomatic service. And he told me, because I'd read about the Nazi fugitives in South America, and he'd known Stroessner, who was the dictator of Paraguay. And because I said to him about South America and Stroessner in the 1970s and 1980s, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I actually ended up in the 1970s as ambassador of Paraguay for about 2 weeks." And I said, "Oh, how was this then?" And he said, "Oh, back in the 1970s, there was no internet, there was hardly any long-term, not so much phone lines, the world was far less connected. So ambassadors who were sent to far-flung places like Paraguay, it was quite a lot of mental strain on them." And he said, the ambassador to Paraguay, he went mad. He came into the office in his underpants. And I was the chief diplomat, civil servant working under him, so he made me ambassador to Paraguay for 2 weeks. And he used to see Stroessner at these diplomatic receptions. And the thing is, when I sort of chatted with them and that, they weren't sort of out and out foaming right wingers, but they were just normal people. You could relax with them. You could chill with them. You could tell a joke. And if I had an opinion that was more right wing than theirs, they'd agree to disagree. And you see all this in the stuff like the sort of comedy the BBC made in the 70s and 80s. And it was a result. People could think freely. People could be right wing. People could be left wing. People could make a joke that others found offensive. I mean, I even wonder whether stuff like The Sopranos would be made now, where he disagreed with his daughter bringing a black guy home, because there's so much of this wokeness going through all the institutions. And you see it's almost Maoist, because, I mean, if you remember, there's all these programs that people born in the late 70s, early 80s like me would have grown up with, like The Sky at Night, or David Attenborough when we were a boy in the 80s. And Patrick Moore, who was a really good bass guy, he used to presented The Sky at Night for 50 odd years. And when he died, who did they get to replace him? A fat black woman. And now they're talking about some Somalian who who needs to be the new David Attenborough. And it's almost like Maoists. They've got to go through every institution, get rid of every traditional thing they've got to get rid of. Now, I'm sure the woman who presents the sky at night is a very good astronomer. But could you imagine in a Nigerian country where they had an iconic program that was about astronomy, that was the program that everyone knew was the main channel's program about astronomy? Can you imagine them giving it to a white man for inclusion? And then this is the sort of thinking that is all through the institutions, and the sort of the conservative-minded people like the Pendletons, people who you know were just normal people. They weren't even massively right-wing, but they weren't PC. That they aren't in the institutions anymore. And then you say to yourself, is it any wonder that we can't send 6 people on a plane to Rwanda? And no, it's not, because our whole institutions, the BBC, the NHS, the prison service, the police, the fire brigade, the teaching profession, the universities, they're packed with people like this, with people like Lee. No one's born racist, no one's born homophobic. This is the thing, and part of the problem is that this is unsustainable. I mean, I heard Millennial Woes say the other week, political correctness was built in a world of luxury, not in a world of hardship. And this is very true. I mean, you think we've got 3 trillion of debt in Britain. We've got inflation at 11%. We've got GDP just went down by 4%. Now, to draw a comparison, under Pinochet in 1977, they had GDP going up by 10%. And I mean, in the COVID hysteria, the government went mad. I mean, they were paying 80% of the salary for 10 million people out of a 30 million workforce. And I remember at the time they did this, I remember saying Margaret Thatcher's phrase about socialism. The problem with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money. And we're already at the point where the interest on the debt in Britain costs more than the entire armed forces. Well, with 11% inflation, they're going to have to put interest rates up. And if it goes up a few more points, it will cost more than the entire NHS. Now, like me, I'm sure you all watch these shows. And I remember Godfrey Bloom was on Dr. Dutton's show, or it might have been Millennial. I think it was on Dr. Dutton. And he said, how could Corbyn have done any worse? And this is the thing. They had all this when Corbyn was standing to be Prime Minister in 2019. They said, oh, he'll bankrupt the country. The country will go to hell in a handcart. And now we've got trillions and trillions of debt because the government went mad during a pandemic that kills 80-year-olds, because we can't accept that death is sadly a part of life, death and risk. And now the country's like Godfrey Bloom says, how could Corbyn have done any worse than this? I mean, I love what Godfrey Bloom called Greta Thunberg, the Swedish doom goblin. I thought that was hilarious. And you think about the situation in Britain, and I've said about how things are for young people, and the house prices. I mean, to give an example, I only own a house because sadly my parents are dead, and because I'd not married and I'd saved up about £50,000, while living at home. Now, I bought my house in 2019 in Biggin Hill for £410,000. Now, the ex-police sergeant that I bought it off, the Boomer police sergeant who was retired, he bought that same house in 1983 for £33,000. And another example of the way things are. In 1989, when I went to senior school, my parents had a choice of 3 different senior schools. They had a choice. Now today, people move house to get the school they want with. It's so hard to get the school you want. This is, with Britain's overpopulation, this is the way it's got. And another example of this is we're at the point where a lot of people, we can't even afford to bury our dead. They say about the winter of discontent, about how we couldn't bury our dead because of all the strikes. Well, nowadays, you can't afford to bury your bloody dead. Now, because when my granddad died in 1993, my mum and grandma, they bought 3 plots in the cemetery. Each plot for my mum and dad, my grandma and granddad, and my uncle Alan. Each plot cost £700. Well, today, a plot in a cemetery costs £5,000 because Britain has been so overcrowded with third world immigration. And now, I know for a fact Muslims, it's against their religion to be cremated. So, join the dots, people. But this is the thing. People can't afford houses. There's 100 graduates for every graduate job. There's no job security. People can't get the school they want. People can't even afford to bury their dead relations. So we're in crisis, and yet we're still throwing a ton of money at this PC woke insanity. And the question is, finally, why are we throwing a ton of money at this nonsense in the middle of a massive economic crisis? And the answer is because they've got no choice, because it goes against nature. They have to do it. It's like Greg Johnson said, our enemies control the media because they have to. They've got no alternative. And they have to micromanage it. I mean, the fact is, a group of people go into a classroom to learn a profession and they can't let them sit where they want. They've got to have someone printing out, writing down to ensure that the Muslim woman sits next to the white man rather than the other Muslim woman. And a good example I've got of how this goes against nature. I remember in October 2004, I was going on holiday to Tenerife. And the irony is, now I live in Lanzarote, I haven't been to bloody Tenerife for years, even though it's a lot nearer. And I was sat on the plane next to this journalist, and it wasn't a raving right-wing Daily Mail journalist. It was Claire Raymond of the Daily Mirror. And this was at the height of the Ken Bigley story. And obviously, poor Ken Bigley, it was a terrible tragedy, and everyone was hoping they could save his life. And the Daily Mirror was running a campaign, and they were getting tons of money coming in and tons of support and offers of support. But then Claire Raymond, she said to me, oh, the minute it came out that he had a Thai wife, the support which had been up there just dived. And the fact is, this is just an example that shows the truth of nature. That people out there, they will make prejudgments about people. They will have stereotypes in their mind. Now, we have a preconception about men who go to Thailand as being sleazy middle-aged divorcees who can't get another wife and they badly treated their first wife. That we have a negative perception about men who go to Thailand for a wife. And the Daily Mirror were doing this campaign, and as soon as it came out he had a Thai wife, the support just dived. And this is the thing, that was nature. That was people's natural reaction. And I mean, my brother, he's got a Chinese wife, and he said, "Oh, sometimes I get stared at." And I said, "Well, you will. People will have a preconception of you in their mind because of it." I said, "There's no point complaining about it. You made the choice." And I mean, my brother didn't go out to China and meet his wife. They're both planning officers, so. But that obviously these preconceptions are out there in people's minds. And when you point out these preconceptions, that's when liberals get really, really annoyed with you, because they know in their heart of hearts you're talking the truth. And I remember Layla Roos, before I was dumped off Twitter, she put a thing praising Colin Kaepernick and about his taking the knee. And I put a reply. I put, Kaepernick, the man abandoned by his biological black father, then adopted and raised by a white couple who now hates white people. That couple should have left the ungrateful piece of crap in the gutter where his black daddy was content to leave him. And rather than just blocking me or just ignoring me, she went mad. She wrote to me, "You're a prick." Now the thing is, the reason she got so angry over that is because there was truth in what I was saying. This mixed race Colin Kaepernick, he's doing his knee, insulting white people, moaning about white privilege, yet he was raised by a white couple because his black daddy abandoned him. And there's a larger amount of black men abandoning their children than there are white men. And that is fact. And me pointing out that fact is why she got so angry. And this is why this Ayatollah always says about the quote from Horace, you can chase nature out the door, but it'll always come back. And wokeness, it's become like a religion. And they're trying, and it's like a religion that goes against nature. And the problem with religion is they're not stable. And religion can mean whatever anyone wants it to mean. Now, I've quoted this book before about the city of Venice. There was a time in the early 17th century when the Pope fell out with the government of Venice, and he sent a papal bull excommunicating the city. Now, his representative in the Republic, he was having a meeting with one of the government officials, and the government official said to this papal representative, "You're not going to read that papal bull out here in Venice." And so the papal representative replies, "I shall proceed as the Holy Spirit inspires me." And then the Venetian official replies, quick as a flash, "The Holy Spirit has already inspired the Council of Ten to hang all disobedient subjects." So there you go. There in Venice in the 17th century, you get someone who tries to use religion, and then it's thrown back in his face, because they're like, well, religion can mean whatever you want it to mean. And I mean, another aspect of religion, we talk about the Catholics and the Protestants in the 17th century, and how they used to, Catholics had burned Protestants, and under Queen Mary and under Queen Elizabeth, Protestants had hanged Catholics. And it was Monday the 4th of February was one of the first burnings. This is about Mary Tudor. So Monday the 4th of February, John Rogers, Canon of St Paul's, was led out to Smithfield, condemned as a heretic. Great crowds lined the street to watch the procession, among them his wife and 11 children. As he stood at the stake, he was offered a pardon on condition that he recanted, but he refused. He exhorted the people to stand firm in the faith that he had taught them. When the fire took hold of his body, he washed his hands in the flame as he was burning. Now, obviously, that's a very brave man, but the point there is, although we don't burn people today, although we don't, thankfully, we don't burn and hang people today, the point there, that John Rogers in February 1555, they put him up on that fire, and then they said to him, if you recant now, if you change your mind, you can get down from that fire and you can be a free man. Now imagine if when I'd had my police hearing where I lost my job, I'd have said to the panel who were deciding whether I keep my job or lose my job, I've changed. I've become a liberal. I agree with multiculturalism. I agree with gay adoption. I want more mosques in Britain. Supposing I said, I've changed, I've recanted, would I have got my job back, or would they have still fired me? No, they'd have still fired me. So the fact is, we look back on the people in these times, in these past times, and say, oh, weren't they intolerant? Weren't they nasty? But in a way, they were more tolerant than the woke religion is today. Because in early modern England, a heretic, he had a chance to recant. Today, you lose your job or you get accused of racism or homophobia, you don't get the chance to recant. You lose your job and that's it. And even if you stand up and say, I've changed my mind, you don't get it. You don't get the John Rogers option of climbing down from the fire. So, I mean, looking back at all of it, I mean, this has been very, very long. I'm sorry I've gone on and on, but I'd say this wokeness, I can't see it lasting long term. And this is why they're having to micromanage it and be more and more intolerant about it and be more and more totalitarian in the enforcement of it. But I'd say why it does still last, I'd say to young people, because we can't all in the movement be self-employed. All I'd say we can do is keep yourself to yourself and keep your head down. And for God's sake, don't be friends with anyone from work on Facebook. Right, thanks for your time. Good night.